modeling, when you design your application to support webhooks or to consume incoming webhooks, and by definition, webhooks are open-ended integration with arbitrary web services. That means, and this guy loves those stuff, right? And it's really good for security when there's open-ended and arbitrary words, right? So you don't know how you should trust the service that is sending those webhooks, and also if you expose and support webhooks, outgoing webhooks, you don't know how it could be abused, and just go over quickly about different threats that could be here. So it's designed to send requests to unknown servers, right? So anybody can go to your online servers and just paste in a URL, right? So one of the attack vectors is attacking arbitrary servers, like for DDoS or others, and just triggering different events in the system, and lots of requests will go to those servers. Manipulating the IP address, maybe IP address validations of those services instead of sending directly to your targets. SSRF, you could just go and place localhost, right? So when you trigger an event in this system, it will send a request to itself. That's classic for SSRF. Application eavesdropping. So if your application uses third-party service that supports webhooks, if you have access to this third party and the authorization scheme is different from your application authorization scheme, and probably in those applications, you could just proxy change this URL to proxy all the webhooks requests to your application and then proxy back to the original URL, and nobody will know about this one. Hiding data exfiltration. So instead of just, if you have a malware inside the network, instead of just sending directly to your CNC from the endpoint to your CNC server, you could just register a webhook on some internal service, like Git, for example, and the webhook URL will be your CNC. So your endpoint won't be sending any direct traffic to your CNC, but just sending some commits to Git, which is like a legitimate traffic inside the network, right? And the Git server will send those requests to your CNC server. Incoming webhook tracks, that's on the receiving part. So the main issue here is that you don't know, as I said, the authorization models. For example, if you integrate with Slack and you would like to receive different, you use Slack people or bots, different bots that part of your CI/CD pipeline or something else. And so you have different roles and levels in your application, right? But it's not the same as the Slack authorization schemes and different roles. So sometimes when you design your application using Slack, sometimes someone who has less permissions in your application, but have the same permissions as others in the Slack channel, right? So he could abuse the Slack channel to get in your application. And real examples, bug in GitHub online service and SSRF that was actually exploited to a full remote code execution on GitHub and won $7,000 bug bounty. So why should we care, right? Everybody uses today webhooks. Any platform today and use webhooks, anyone. So let's see several, the point is how we abuse the API developers and how webhooks change not only our concerns in production, but also during the development itself, and how it's different from the regular development practices. So one of the challenges when you build webhooks, you rely on third-party applications, right? And if you're developing on your computer, on your laptop, on your station, you have some APIs, right? How do you test webhook integrations? You need to receive, to have a listening port, right, in your organization, but that requires the regular process, right? Going to the security department, asking, to open some port and forward it to a specific area, which the militarized zone. So it's a challenge, and there are solutions. Remember the ngrok service? So there are several solutions out there, online tools, right? Great, people love online tools instead of installing. So we start seeing, we're going deeper and understanding like what's those services, like why people use it and how much they use it. We've seen like on almost all the forums, talking about those types of services and that how easy to just, redirect this traffic and tunnel it to your application. The problem is that the developers don't really understand what they are doing. They'll just will go to this server, download some client, and they don't understand that they have like HTTP tunnel on their directly to their endpoint. You see from the example from an Atlassian forum, and there are many more of those services out there, and they're just laundering the old good tunnels with the webhook testing words. So let's see an example, like just to showcase the problem. That's the main challenge. We are talking about when you use. It's a classic like architecture today for the organizations, and there's the internal zone, there's the DMZ. So usually someone who would like to hack your organization, right? They will go for there's the military zone, which is separate from the internal zone. But once you have those applications directly exposed to the internet by the developers, someone could hack, and the meaning of this hack and the damage is to be inside your corporate network and not inside the DMZ. The other thing and the other concern here is that actually, there's no, like all this SDLC process, right? The secure development lifecycle and the hardening of your application before it goes to the DMZ for production or even for like staging environment. You don't have those processes. So most probably you will expose an application that wasn't pen tested, that wasn't audited. Your environment is not hardened, right? Just your development environment. And that's different from the classic development cycle, because the classic development cycle, developers won't expose a web server locally on their endpoint, but go on the regular path. So let's see a case study with specifically, we focus on this ngrok service to see like what can we take out this one. Let's see, switch to TOMER.
Okay, so let's see a case study by exploiting ngrok. So I will start an ngrok server. This server is now online. It's just, oh. Why is that? Hope we will see it now. What? So the presentation is fine, but okay. Now we can see it. Okay. So I will start the ngrok client again. Now this ngrok client is a link to another application inside my internal network. And now this internal application could be accessed by people from the outside world and not just from the internal network or the local host. So now I can just surf this web and I will see the application. Now those applications, like Max said, doesn't have an SDLC, and people won't fix those bugs automatically because those are internal applications, and every developer knows that if it's internal, it's okay that we will have security bugs. But no, it's not. So let's see what happens when you put this internal application outside. So let's, I have some demo. It's actually a Tomcat, and this Tomcat server is vulnerable to a put method. That means that when I send put method with data, it will create a file with this data. So I can just take this command. I will put it in CMD. I will send it to my server. And now I should have cmd.jsp. Let's wait. And I have cmd.jsp. So where am I? I'm root. And that's it. I'm in the internal network. No problem. So now I will show another example of how people can see those endpoints. So this endpoint is actually my endpoint. It's never posted on the internet, so no one's supposed to know what this endpoint is, or where to find it. But sometimes people create their own certificates, like SSL pinning, or just they want to create their own certificate for security reasons. So let's take the domain name and put it here as a subdomain in crt.sh. that will show us lots of certifications that were created lately. And you will see that we have here the domain that I showed the vulnerability on. So that's another way to find those endpoints, to enumerate the domains by using tools like subdomain analyzer and other tools that will find subdomains by looking at lots of websites, and then you will be able to exploit them. So back to Max.
So we just wanted to understand like how popular this one, and we just enumerated different domains, both by using like sublist, domain analyzer and ZAIT, ZAVODCHIK, and just enumerating dictionaries like different domains, and found the Italian Post website that was actually like allowing uploading APK and like different iOS apps to their store, which seems like a development environment. Another example, some travel group with like a login password, right? Everything is okay, but vulnerable to SQL injection. Some other website, in TOMER's example, a default Tomcat installation with just no authentication on the manager, just upload any jar and you own this endpoint. Another company which like allowed guest authentication. An interesting one was some banking service, which is like some Swift API. You see the same Tomcat admin is open there on this endpoint. And when we looked at the API, we found the source code on the Git bucket. Like that's. And many more examples. That's just a few. And like the domain selling company had like internal server using ngrok. And there were like PHPMyAdmin without authentication with lots of databases. So testing webhooks, right? That's just one attack vector, right? So that's like not the specific vulnerability in this channel, right? But how people develop those applications. That's a real concern today, because the threat scape changes not just for the production, as we say, but also for the development. And the webhook testing online tools, that's just one example. There are other categories that you could inspect using online tools, inspect incoming like API requests instead of deploying proxy tool on the server. You just use some online service and provide this URL as the endpoint that you can use those online tools. And many of them are indexed and not protected with any like password or credentials, so anyone could just enumerate those pages and see real requests in production even on those websites. So we wanted to try to see like, okay, let's look for more vulnerabilities. Like, okay, what happens if those guys install those clients? How we can abuse also those clients, right? Because to create this channel, those tunnels, you need to deploy this executable, this tunnel locally, and then, like it says, like take advantage of a powerful local inspector. That means after you install this tool on your device as a developer, you have also a local website that you could see all the incoming requests for debugging as a proxy, right, on this tunnel. So we found some vulnerability there that allowed actually to enumerate, like, if we could convince anyone to get into any developer with this tool installed to our phishing website, we could just enumerate all the tunnels and also do some more interesting stuff. So take advantage. Please take advantage.
Okay, so again, if we have, if we know a developer that uses ngrok, we can do lots of stuff. So in the older version, of course, this bug was fixed because we told ngrok guys that they have this bug and they fixed it. Actually, they don't use WebSocket anymore. So this bug is a WebSocket bug. They just have a WebSocket connection. I will show it right now. So if we use, they have the local host. So local host 4040. And I'm in the inspector. So here the inspector get all the information from one WebSocket connection. I will refresh and you'll see this connection. So here in this connection, there's just messages that show all the information about the tunnels that you have right now. So they just stopped using WebSocket, so this vulnerability removed. But still, there another vulnerability that I will show here. So here's an example what happens when someone enters a website. And this website only connects to the internal network, to the local host WebSocket server, and just get all the information about all the hooks and even requests that got to those hooks and statistics and everything. So this is, okay. This is a really short example. I will show another example of a vulnerability that was never fixed, and I'm not sure if they will fix it because this vulnerability is presented in almost every web server. So I will show a sneak peek of Red Tunnel that I will show in another presentation on B-Sides and Black Hat and other conventions as well. So this is an example of someone that play just solitaire. And of course, behind the scenes, there's the Red Tunnel iframe. And this Red Tunnel iframe connected to the Red Tunnel core management system. So this is the Red Tunnel management. Of course, you can see that someone connected. It started pinging the hosts. Of course, local host is...
maybe just to say, it's a phishing site, right?
Yes.
That's like the gaming card, online gaming card, solitaire that a developer access, and we have like our malicious JavaScript, and following the vulnerabilities on those clients that are bounded listening to connections on local host, you could actually exploit those services.
So the whole DNS rebinding process is automatic in Red Tunnel. So it scanned for the port, it found the port, it knows that this port is HTTP port, and now it starts to do the DNS rebinding process, and we can see it here on the logs, the same thing. It's just because it's a debug version. And we can see the rebinding process is over. So let's go back here and we can explore the application. And now we actually surf the same application, but externally from Red Tunnel. And we can just use the API like any normal guy that used the development version of this inspector. So we see that we have an API and we can call /API/tunnels to create a tunnel. So let's use it to our advantage. So I will go here. I will take this JavaScript simple code that just send post request to /API/tunnels. I will clear the logs to see that it's here. Let's see that I didn't mess up. And I have a TCP connection. Let's try. And now also RDP is in a, we have tunnel to the RDP as well. That's a thing that we couldn't do with a regular DNS rebinding attack. Okay, Max? A second.
So just to summarize the attack, so TOMER exploited here the client, the developer that installed this client, and the client was vulnerable to this, had this website, not website, like the tools, the debugging tool, the proxy running on localhost, and TOMER used DNS rebinding attack to actually to bypass the cross-region policy. And the problem is that this debugging tool didn't use any authentication, right? Because it's on localhost, right? Why should you care? And if it doesn't have any authentication, you could just do the DNS rebinding attack where you quickly switch the DNS record to the local host. And so you load one page, the main HTML, you load it from your website, right? Because the DNS points to your website. But the time to live for this DNS record is like 0. So if you try to render another iframe inside the original code, the browser will go to your DNS again. But now you return a record with the localhost, and then the browser will go to the local server and load the website, the local website in this iframe. But from the browser perspective, it's running in the same origin because both the iframe and the top frame are in the same domain, which is your domain. So you could read all this information, and the red tunnel tool is actually exploitation framework for this one. Okay. So what TOMER did is exploited actually this Angro client with this local tools to doesn't have any authentication to create another tunnel because that's what it supports. It has REST API to create another tunnel, and it supports not only HTTP tunnels but also TCP tunnels. And in our case, just create a TCP tunnel for like the RDP port, right? And to forward all the RDP traffic with our own user and just connect over, take control over this device. And they promise much more, right? So that's just one service out of many services, and you see like hundreds of thousands of users just for this service. If you just Google Angrok.io or other service, you'll see lots of results. So what we can do? Don't panic. This guy has a beard. So from the defender's perspective, you could, of course, monitoring blacklisting those services in your firewall, right? Because those clients are like the regular tunnels that will try to connect this specific like domain, Angrok.io or others. So I guess firewall vendors might be aware of those, or at least the security teams, IT teams should be aware of those and start monitoring those services and blocking those IP addresses and domains if someone will try to download and use it. And I think the most important is that we within the security community understand that it's a tunnel, right? And what's the meaning of creating a tunnel directly to your endpoint inside the corporate? But I think developers don't understand it. Many like less security aware developers, and the problem is that there's no warning on those websites saying like, oh, that's what could happen to you, right? It's just a webhook testing tool, webhook debugging tool, and also there could be some solutions. We have something we develop internally. We call it WebSocket hook. So like you could also expose a service, an HTTP application, without really creating a tunnel to your computer, but just proxying the data to a specific page. We use the WebSocket, that's why we call it. So for the pen testers, it's a nice opportunity, right? Webhooks. So first of all, you could just search for some functionality, webhooks functionality that you have here, there, and like use one of the threads there, like SSRF or others to exploit it. See whether it's like unbound or no, blacklisting for localhost and others. And also reconnaissance for incoming webhooks. And if you see that this application has integrations with third parties, and that's how microservices, like all the modern applications work. They combine a combination of different services today. So you could attack this service. For example, just like, I don't know if it's a vulnerability, but in Slack, for example, the channels, if you have the same email address for the same organization, anyone can join this channel. So if you take over an email, one of the corporate emails, you could use this email to get into all the channels of the company. So that's something that maybe people don't know when they rely on those services. Enumeration of different domains to find your targets. Also services called like request bin and others. So thank you. That was Tomer and myself. Thank you.